Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Brought to you once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Yeah, the future Liberty State. And boy, do we need it. Later on in the episode, I'm going to talk about something that should have everybody paying attention. This is one of those episodes you need to bookmark, because we did this in 2020. In August of 2020, people thought we were conspiracy theorists, and it all came true. Weird. Why did it come true? Was it some sort of special prophetic gift? Maybe partly. I don't know. But actually, we just read their stuff. We're going to do that today, about what they have in store. And we talked a little bit about predictive programming here a couple weeks ago. But today, Iran balks. Ukraine invades Russia. You heard that correctly. France attacks Christians again, and then again after that. And the left, once again, war games an election coup. And our guest today is Sheriff Richard Mack to talk about the attack on law enforcement locally, what that means for you and I, especially in light of the upcoming elections and what's very likely to follow with civil unrest by the Marxists and maybe even the jihadis. Our goal here at Patriot Radio is to bring you more accurate information than the legacy media. Fairly easy to do that, actually. And make sure that you and your family are prepared for what's ahead. In fact, what's already upon us. No fear. We were made for this. As always, remember the summer of harvest and subscribe to Patriot Radio on Rumble. Take a moment. Patriot Radio US on Rumble. Share with your friends. We're starting to get a lot of traction on Rumble. Thank you, everybody that has been paying attention to the episodes and forwarding them to friends and family. Also, really make sure that you follow us on Telegram for real-time intelligence updates. This is actually now being shared across the country. I'm not going to say who's exactly on there, but it's being shared across the country now as a source of breaking news and information. And if you want to support two great causes, you can always support Epoch Times. Promo code Patriot Radio and ZStackLife.com. Promo code Patriot Radio. You get to feed your mind healthy and your body. And that brings us now to the Bible teaching today, Acts chapter 4, verse 29. I want to pay attention to this, because this is for this time. And there's a quote from George Washington I'm going to try to pull up during the show. It also is for this time, about what to do when things don't really look good, okay? Because this isn't the first time this has happened to America, where things didn't really look like they were going to turn out well. And yet, because brave men and women stood on the line, God honored that and brought us through. So verse 29, and now, Lord, behold their threatenings, and grant unto thy servants that with all boldness they may speak thy word. In other words, when the enemy starts to threaten us, and we are seeing that now, especially in the wake of the Trump-Elon Musk X space last night, we're seeing that we need to speak boldly. What do we have to lose? I think some people are worried about their reputations. Hey, we need to lay it all on the line. Founding fathers put on the line their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor. In other words, their reputations. We need to put it all on the line if we want to see this great country continue for another generation. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Constitution today and what it really says, because many of you, especially in the Jacob generation, have been lied to. And I want to read to you the actual words from the Constitution and the actual context in which it was written, because the Founding Fathers were crystal clear on the difference between a republic and a democracy. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing, coming to us from the globalist front.
Those naughty globalists.
The AI black swan, power prices skyrocket on East and West Coast. Now, this is something I could speak personally about because I spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives as the ranking Republican in environment. And when the issue of power came up and the grid stability for the United States, this was 6 and 7 years ago now. I very clearly was talking about the simple facts of the matter, that if you retire power plants while you are hooking everything up to the grid with electric cars and unstable green energy, because it's not good baseload power, that eventually you are going to have a power crisis. And in fact, that is exactly what we are facing. Trump recently stated that AI will require the doubling of energy production in America. So this AI wasn't even an issue back then. So now we've got electric cars on the grid, and now AI is also going to double the need for energy. And they're retiring power plants. They've stifled effectively the production of nuclear power, and small modular nuclear reactors really are one of the key answers to the issues in the future, along with hydrogen fuel cells and recombination technology, all of which is made in Washington State. And if Washington wanted to truly be a leader in this, we could. But if we continue to hook up unstable and, I would argue, unreliable green energy, such as wind and solar, that produce power in off-peak times, instead of protecting baseload power from nuclear energy and dams, then we are going to face a power crisis in the United States of America. In other words, rolling blackouts like you would see in a third world country. And this is not hyperbole, it's math. We do not have enough production to meet the demand. And it takes a while to create these power plants. Why are we trying to retire them? Perhaps this is a plan to make it so hard to build new power plants, so hard to bring them online, so difficult to keep them going once you do have them online, that they want to intentionally collapse the grid, because that's the only thing that would make sense. Those that are behind the green agenda anyway. That brings us now to the China front. A brief history of the Chinese waltz. That is a play on words. What if the Chinese recruited an American politician and then over a period of 30 years cultivated him as he climbed the ladder politically until he was one step away from the presidency? End quote. Oh, wait. And Sam Faddis details the history of Tim Walz. And we're not talking about his controversy regarding being a command sergeant major. We're actually talking about the fact that he had his wedding on the anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre that, according to his wife, Waltz wanted a date that, quote, would be easy to remember, end quote. Then he and his bride honeymooned in China. and brought 60 American students with them. Or when his wife reacted to the riots in Minneapolis in 2020 by opening the windows in their homes so she could smell the city burn. Or the trip after trip, year after year to China. And at least one trip in 1993 paid for in part by the Chinese government. Certainly this raises a ton of questions, and should this truly pass a counterintelligence screening, is he even fit for office one heartbeat away from the presidency? Also on the China front, China admits, and this just came in literally 10 minutes ago, China admits it destroyed key Baltic gas pipeline by accident. I want you to hear that again. China admits it destroyed a key Baltic gas pipeline by accident. Beijing has admitted that a Chinese-owned ship damaged a critical Baltic Sea pipeline running between Estonia and Finland. It was accidental because of a strong storm. Wonder how many more accidental cable severings and pipeline incidents we're going to see here in the next 6 months. Also, Taiwan to mount missile drills off the East Coast as the PLA flexes more military muscle nearby. The island's Air Force and Navy will test the combat readiness of its personnel and equipment in exercises later this month. In a positive note in the defense of Taiwan, man-portable anti-tank, anti-ship, and anti-air systems appear to be coming into the country quickly, which is going to be a huge deterrent to any sort of a Chinese invasion. U.S. funding $32 million upgrade to air base in the Philippines. The Pentagon awarded a $32 million contract to upgrade an airfield in the Philippines as part of a broader U.S. program to upgrade and improve Manila's military bases. Funded under the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, this is a plan very clearly to counter China. And the Basa Air Base is set to receive a 625,000 square foot parking apron capable of hosting up to 20 aircraft. So we're seeing this continue to happen. And as the United States does more military drills in the Pacific, it is under the cover of that supplies are also being moved forward and staged as far forward as possible. So someone understands strategy, at least in the Pacific. And that brings us now to the Middle East front. Weapons deal approved by U.S. Secretary of State includes sale to Israel of 50 F-15 fighter jets and over 32,000 tank rounds and 50,000 mortar rounds. Once again, this does appear that they are preparing clearly for war in the Middle East. Iranian state media is claiming that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Iranian Air Defense Forces are currently conducting exercises across the north of the country, including in and around the capital of Tehran. However, later in the day, Tehran walked back the possibility of an attack by saying, well, if peace talks actually bear fruit, they might not attack. So they might be trying to find an off-ramp because they know Israel means business. Also, Israel put its military on a high alert after observing preparations by Iran and Hezbollah to carry out possible attacks, the Wall Street Journal reports. Now, they're going back and forth. Most of this is disinformation to keep the element of surprise out there. So we're just going to continue to watch that, but clearly everybody is taking this seriously. Also, we bring this map up, U.S. Navy assets deployed in the Middle East. So the carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and its escorts will accelerate their voyage from the Pacific to the Mideast. And the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier group is there as well. In addition, Pentagon signaled that a guided missile submarine capable of carrying 154 Tomahawk land attack missiles and U.S. Special Operations Forces was headed to the Central Command Theater. Now, Ohio-class submarines are a strategic deterrent. It's very clear a message is being sent there. Also, although this happened in the United States, it bears impact on the Middle East. A New Jersey imam, Sheikh Ismail Hamdi, praised the leader of Hamas. The imam also emphasized the importance of seeking martyrdom, which means he's calling for jihad. Is anybody investigating this? Perhaps they should be. And also from open source intel, Vice News, now since defunct, or at least on its way to being defunct totally, interviewed Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas. Listen to this. Do you think the new U.S. administration will make any difference for you? And here is his response, quote, I've noticed a tangible change from the new administration in its approach to all issues, particularly Palestinian issues. The bias towards Israel is less than it was under the previous Trump administration. In other words, the leader of the terrorist organization Hamas would prefer a Biden administration. And that brings us now to the Russia front. In a fairly bold move, the Ukrainian army invaded Russia in the Belgorod region and also the Kursk region. Now, Kursk is where the primary thrust is. But those two regions were traditionally Ukrainian, going back to the 1700s. And for those that say that they didn't exist back then, they did. And that's why there was Holodomor under Stalin that specifically targeted Ukrainians, because it was recognized as an ethnic group. Just so we're clear on history there, because some people don't understand that. Now, the clear part about this is that some reports are saying 400 square kilometers, some are saying 800. Either way, a significant chunk of those regions are now under Ukrainian control, and Ukrainian forces are holding the ground. Putin claims that they're doing that just to improve negotiating positions for peace talks, and then ended peace talks. Some are saying, well, no, there's actually a dramatic flaw in the Russian military, which is where I actually would agree. General George Patton believed this as well, that when Russians followed Soviet tactics and strategy, there would be nothing behind their front lines, and that you could easily go around them and run around in the rear areas, and that is what it looks like the Ukrainians are doing. Which brings us to the next article regarding the Kursk offensive. The Sudza gas metering station is no more. Now, nobody knows what that is, except for maybe the Europeans, because it was the only gas Russian pipeline supplying gas to Europe. Gone. So there are some significant things happening, although not a lot of people are talking about them. Also, the Ukrainian army has taken Plakovo in the Kursk region in Russia, and some locals were greeting them on camera by shouting glory to Ukraine. So again, traditional, at least historical, Ukrainian regions seem to be welcoming the Ukrainian army there. And Putin obviously is flustered by this, because when the administrator of the Kursk region kind of bluntly said what the situation was, he said, that's not for you to say. Publicly rebuked him on camera. So something's happening there we're going to keep our eyes on. I'm not going to say it's going to shift the entire war, but this is a significant development. Also on the Russia front, Poland signs a $10 billion deal for U.S. Apache attack helicopters. Poland has learned its historic lesson, World Wars I and II, and is now dramatically arming and increasing the size of its military at a pace that really hasn't been seen in at least 50 years in that part of Europe. Which brings us now to the national front. J. Michael Waller, the federal indictment of the Smartmatic executives for international corruption and bribery does not mention the company by name. It reveals a network of shell companies in Hong Kong, Anguilla, British Virgin Islands, and bank accounts in Hong Kong, Singapore, and Switzerland. Very interesting read If found guilty on all counts, the Smartmatic president and COO could face 90 years in prison. And then J. Michael Waller's comment, quote, pro tip, don't bribe a public official who's going through a divorce and whose embittered wife knows about his sudden wealth, end quote. Probably a good pro tip there. Also on the national front, sometimes an athlete will do something to testify of the glory of Jesus Christ and will honor him publicly. And Sidney McLaughlin did that. Quote, I would take my relationship with Christ over a gold medal any day. End quote. And amen. Great job, Sidney. Gateway Pundit, shocking new footage, police body cam released of Trump assassin pointing gun. Oh, here, guys. Okay, so everyone out there at Patriot Radio, Trump assassin pointing gun at officers before firing on the president. If you have a gun pointed at you at a presidential rally as an officer of the peace, the question then becomes, why did you not do anything about that? And the more that comes out about this incident, the more it really truly is clear that God protected his life. Also, Trump put out his 20 core promises. I want to go through these because actually it's pretty fantastic. Seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. Number 2, carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. Number 3, end inflation and make America affordable again. Number 4, make America the dominant energy producer in the world by far. Number 5, stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. Can I get a double amen there? Number 6, large tax cuts for workers and no tax on tips. By the way, in politics, if you're going to steal somebody's idea, don't be weird about it. And Kamala Harris is like, oh, I'm for, no tax on tips. I think I was told to say that. Whatever. Anyway, she says that, and then now she's trying to claim it as her policy, even though the IRS is actually trying to crack down on exactly that. Anyway, incredible. Defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms. Number 8, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and in the Middle East, and build a Great Iron Dome missile defense shield over our entire country, all made in America. End the weaponization of government against the American people. Stop the migrant crime epidemic. Demolish the foreign drug cartels. Crush gang violence and lock up violent offenders. By the way, this is why X is becoming so important, because as soon as Trump and Elon Musk started talking about these issues, everybody was rushing to censor them because the mainstream media cannot stop the truth. They're so afraid of it. Rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again. Strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world. Keep the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. Fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age. Now, this is the one I would be like, well, that actually shouldn't have been there in the first place. There should be the private options so that and not being taxed into oblivion, so Americans can actually save for their retirement. So I would have a discussion point there. Cancel the electric vehicle mandate and cut costly and burdensome regulations. Come on, somebody. Cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. Keep men out of women's sports. Megan, can we get an amen? Amen. Amen. Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. Secure our elections, including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. And unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. I think he's kind of echoing the sentiments of most Americans there. Which brings us to the next article. The Spectator Index. The Economist reports that the Biden administration has begun preparing for the expansion of America's deployed nuclear forces after decades of deep cuts, and the buildup could start in 2026. All this is covering at the last minute for intentionally undermining our military readiness his entire career. And I'm talking about Joe Biden. Weakness invites war. And now they weakened the military. They weakened our national deterrence. And now all of a sudden he's trying to scramble to try to cover it for Kamala. Disgusting. That brings us to a very interesting article from OCPA. Cherokee Nation entity linked to child trafficking. Unaccompanied minors who illegally entered the United States are being released to child traffickers by the U.S. government, condemning those youth to a life of forced labor or worse. And a business arm of the Cherokee Nation is facilitating that abuse, according to whistleblower testimony provided this month to members of the U.S. Senate, end quote. Now, this is something we tried to cover last month. How deep does this one go? Now, I remember we had a very robust discussion about how to stop human trafficking on Indian reservations, or at least acknowledge that it was occurring even, let alone child trafficking. Some huge questions being raised by that whistleblower testimony. And the question is, of course, for us, is anyone going to have the political will? Any local county sheriff possibly going to have the political will to actually do something about this and stop it in their area? Which brings us to Elon Musk. The legacy media doesn't have time to report meaningfully because they are busy generating fake oppression narratives. And here is yearly mentions of prejudice in popular U.S. news media outlets. Look at this. And it's so fascinating that it spikes during election times. So what this really is a graph of is fifth generation warfare. The battle of narratives and ideas. That's what we're witnessing right now. And that brings us to, now I put this on the national front because I want us here in the United States to understand the implications of this. But Christians were arrested in Paris. Okay, so they had the opening ceremonies that mocked Jesus and were super weird anyway. They have the ending ceremonies that were clearly satanic. And then they arrest Christians in Paris for protesting the persecutions of Christians at the first ceremony. This is what Marxists want to do here in America. They're not satisfied. They're not satisfied with trying to shut you up and censor you. They want to throw you in jail or worse, because communists traditionally and Marxist-Leninists traditionally very openly talk about the next step after that, and that is killing their opponents. So what we're seeing with this stuff is direct persecution of Christians. We're speaking out against clear mocking, degradation, and persecution of Christians. We're going to keep our eyes on that and pay attention to it. Check that out on Twitter. Also, Knightsbridge Research, white hat hackers find voting machine vulnerabilities. Again, white hat hackers were able to breach voting machines in order to recommend security fixes to officials and authorities. The event is held every August and has always found vulnerabilities. Of course it has. Why are these things even hooked up to the internet still? Oh, they're not. And then, yes, they are. They end up being hooked up to the internet. So, of course, there's vulnerabilities there. That brings us to a very interesting last 3 minutes here. Very interesting article, J. Michael Waller. Back in 2020, in August of 2020, we went through the Transition Integrity Project report about what the election would look like a few months after, in November. This is August of 2020. Elections were in November 2020. We went through that report, and quite literally in that report, we read what the headlines were going to be. Specifically in War Game 2 and 3. And lo and behold, in November and following on, those were the headlines. So we're going to take a little bit of time over the next week, and we're going to go through the next iteration of that. So the war game now is part of the 2024 Democracy Futures Project, a revival of a 2020 exercise called the Transition Integrity Project. 2020 exercise called for a military coup against Trump if his election was certified. A revived exercise involving many of the same people is calling for a coup again, while fanning public fears that it is Trump who would stage the coup, end quote. Well, we went ahead, and if we could pull this up, we went ahead and found one of the reports on the upcoming election that was linked to the Democracy Futures Project. Now, it's under the democracyfund.org. We have downloaded this report, so if they try to eliminate it, we've got it. And they go through some interesting terms. So I'm going to go through these because you're going to hear these terms suddenly come out of nowhere shortly. So they call an event that is prepared for and foreseeable a white swan event. An event that is foreseeable but unprepared for a gray rhino event. That's a very interesting choice there. Rhinos, of course, being the pejorative for Republicans in name only. Unforeseeable events that people are prepared for, paper tigers, and unprepared for events that are unforeseeable, black swans. And then additional considerations. I want you to listen to these. Dragon kings and peacocks. That's what they call them. Okay. So they gave some examples here of what a gray rhino is. So gray rhino to them would be the false claim that the 2020 election was stolen. Although we now know that a lot of the questions that were raised, issues that were raised, actually may show the exact opposite, that the 2020 election was in fact stolen. And can we not have a debate on that in America? Apparently not, because they said they were unprepared for the scale and persistence of the attacks. That's actually a compliment, Patriot side. Now, regarding the unforeseeable side, paper tigers, the example of a paper tiger would be voting machine hacking, but that's not a paper tiger, really. Because remember, a paper tiger for them is an unforeseeable event that they're prepared for. Well, it's not really unforeseeable because of what I just reported on, the DEF CON summit, where they keep hacking these things every single year. So it's not really unforeseeable. Black Swan event, the storming of the Capitol and the insurrection on January 6th, once again repeating this lie out there about the peaceful protesters who were there on January 6th. But perhaps the most interesting is the, quote, Dragon King, end quote. And it's as if they are predicting in this election certification refusal. A critical mass of counties and or states refuse. Hear that. It's almost like they're preparing for a critical mass of counties and or states, whatever critical mass means, to refuse to certify the election results, and attempts to resolve the dispute through legal means fail. President defies judiciary. So now this again seems to be aimed at Trump on one side. A president refuses to abide by a court order even after an appeals process is played out. Are they saying that conservatives may have enough counties? Or are they saying that that's their plan? Well, we're going to get into that next episode. But I want to read quickly who these people are and why it's so offensive and should be so offensive to any American who loves the Constitution of the United States. Quote, from democracy to remain healthy, people must be able to have confidence in their political leaders and institutions and trust their political system is fair and able to deliver on its core responsibilities. One never really defines what those are. But this is exactly the opposite of what the Marxist-Leninists do. They actually undermine all of these things and undermine the faith in institutions. So another organization that was linked to this website is called Trusted Elections Fund. And I want to read a little bit about what they are. And we're going to get into this deeper. But this is an interesting phrase. TEF advances work across 3 core strategies to counter emergent threats, undermine American democracy. The threat, election sabotage. The second, build resilience to election-related political violence. And third, build field infrastructure to prepare for crisis. Again, it's as if they're preparing for civil unrest with this. But they keep using, and this is what I want to hit on today before we get into the details of this later this week and next week. They keep using this word democracy, that they need to uphold democracy. But the word democracy is not found in any of the 50 state constitutions or any of the original founding documents. However, James Madison clearly said that the founding fathers chose, and remember, this is the guy that wrote the original draft of the Constitution and brought it to the convention. He said, we don't want a democracy because in a democracy, 50.01% can vote away the rights of the minority. We want a republic, res publica. It's the Latin, which means the rule of law. In other words, no matter who's in power, no one, doesn't matter if they're Christian or you don't like what they say, no one will lose their rights because their rights come not from the Constitution, but from God. The Constitution is there to protect those rights. That's why I don't say constitutional rights, I say constitutionally protected rights, because that is the accurate statement according to the founding fathers. But more to the point, some of you in the Jacob generation have been lied to that we live in a democracy. We do not. We live in a republic. And in fact, the Constitution requires that if you want to live in the United States and you swear allegiance and you want to become a citizen, you actually pledge to a republic, because Article 4, Section 4 of the United States Constitution says this: the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican, not a Democratic, a Republican form of government. And this is not some insignificant semantics. This is core. Because in a republic, you can never lose your rights, because your rights come from God, not man. What the Marxist-Leninists want you to think is that your rights come from them. That, my friends, is tyranny. And we should fight it with every fiber of our being. And that's a brief. Remember, the antidote to dependency and socialism is to be a God-fearing, self-reliant, freedom-loving American. Thank you to everybody that has been praying for us. And make sure you subscribe to us on Rumble, Patriot Radio US, and follow us on Telegram for real-time breaking intelligence and news. And there is a difference between the two, and we're not going to get into it today, but please follow us there if you want to know what's happening, especially as it seems like we're living a decade every day. And that brings us now to our guest today, Sheriff Richard Mack. He's been a force to be reckoned with for keeping the role of government by the people and for the people in its proper place, for restoring a republic to its proper place, and that the Constitution means what it says. And he's most well known for the landmark case, Mack Prince v. U.S., which solidified the right to bear arms, and it solidified the power of the county sheriff as the chief law enforcement officer in the land. Sheriff Mack, it's great to have you back on Patriot Radio. How are you doing?
Really well, Matt. It's been a while. I thought maybe you moved to Costa Rica or something.
No, not yet. I don't think I'm going to plan on that. I think we got to make our stand here, don't you?
Yes, I have more than a couple of friends who have moved out of Dodge, and actually they live in Ecuador and Costa Rica, and I think one's in Argentina. But I'm not moving. No, I would never do that. First of all, I would be moving right back because I'd miss my grandkids too much, I'm sure. So,
well, I appreciate that, years ago now, I mean, I can't even believe it's like 15 years or something like that. Years ago, we began the conversation about the 10th Amendment, and you had already been spearheading it for years before I even came on the scene. And it's coming to a head right now with the power of the sheriff specifically being attacked at the local level, but also by some national and international entities who are trying to either nationalize law enforcement or trying to abolish the sheriff completely.
Yeah. Well, they're going after the sheriff specifically because during the last, 8 to 10 years, the sheriffs have taken a strong stand against the federal government in many respects. They've stood against the Bureau of Land Management. They've stood against Forest Service. They've stood against the FDA, even the Army Corps of Engineers. I actually stood against the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers in my county because they wouldn't let us fix a bridge, and the people in the county were really getting ticked off about it. And then ultimately, now get this, ultimately, the EPA and Army Corps of Engineers threatened to arrest our Board of Supervisors, our county commissioners, because they were going to fix the bridge without the federal government's permission. And so they voted unanimously to just fix the bridge because they were sick and tired of the red tape and delays of the federal government. So, as you know, Matt, the sheriff doesn't have anything to do with fixing bridges. However, when they threaten to arrest our county commissioners and charge us $35,000 a day for every day we're in violation of their orders, and they were going to arrest the maintenance workers, then I got involved and I called them in. I said, just so you guys know, I'm already suing the federal government. Were you aware? Oh, yeah, we know. I said, well, I get along with everybody, but don't make any mistake here. You're not arresting anybody in my county. And if you try, I'm going to arrest you. So I'm not saying you have to leave. I'm not banishing you. I'm just simply saying I will stand up to you and I will arrest you. And must have called somebody from Washington or whatever, and they said, yeah, go ahead and leave. Because, I know for a fact that the federal government doesn't want to fight with sheriffs. And so they left, we fixed the bridge, and we didn't pay any fines, and the people of our community were served, the federal government notwithstanding. So, and Matt, I have this, my Supreme Court case. I have it right here. There we go. And it's on my website. And this is a highlighted review of my case. And this is the best ammunition that anybody could have to show local officials, give this to your sheriff, give it to your county commissioner, give it to your county attorney, for heaven's sakes, because they never seem to get it, Matt. And I know you're a lawyer, but the county attorneys in this country never seem to get the 10th Amendment. And this is what we sued on, as you alluded to. And Scalia wrote the decision, and he calls us the Cleos. And so did the Brady bill that we sued to stop. It calls us the Cleos, the chief law enforcement officer. And so Scalia, in his introduction of the case, says the answer to the Cleos challenge must be sought in historical understanding and practice. Matt, he just takes us through a history lesson, and he quotes the Federalist Papers. He quotes the founders. He quotes the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, and he reestablishes federalism and the power and sovereignty of the states. And in one particular case, in Federalist 51, he says this, and I quote, "Hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different governments will control each other." Now, I don't know if you could get more powerful than that, but there's actually more powerful stuff in here than just that. And then from the New York VUS case of 1992, he quotes that a statement from there, and he says, "We have held, however, that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction." Now, don't you wish your state legislature knew that? They're supposed to already know that, but many of them just go along to get along, and they want all that federal money. And so right now, I believe that we are on, we're at the threshold of completely destroying our country and destroying our Constitution and accepting the Communist Manifesto in place of our Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights. Or are we, as Americans, are we going to stand with our sheriffs and other elected officials locally and create the barriers against the encroachments of the national authority and thus save our country and save our Constitution? Because I believe this is the year that's going to happen.
I do too, and I can feel it. I mean, you can just kind of tangibly sense that there are Americans waking up right now, and they need to know the truth. And many Americans don't know this truth, and I want to get into the specifics here. The chief law enforcement officer of the county. What does that practically mean? And Scalia, as you correctly were talking about, was recognizing an existing underpinning that's core to our republic. This isn't something that just came out of thin air. This has actually been in place for hundreds of years.
Of course. Well, Scalia did such a terrific job on this, and I don't know why this is such a hidden case. This is the most ignored case in history at the Supreme Court, and it came out the last day of the term, June 27, 1997. And just recently, when they had the end of the term for the Supreme Court, they said all of the most important cases, they saved the most important cases for the last day. Ours was the last day.
Right.
And yet it's been downplayed and ignored and violated almost on a daily basis. And here I am, the Lone Ranger in the country, trying to get this message out to everyone so that they can use it as I said, ammunition against the encroachments of the national authority. And we've got to take our country back. And this is great credibility to help us do that.
So let's get into the practical part of this. Can a sheriff initiate an investigation against a potential jihadi group in a county? Can a sheriff do that?
In his county, in his jurisdiction, yes, of course.
Okay, so if the federal government comes in and tries to stop your investigation into a jihadi group because they say that they are taking care of it at the national level, which at least in the last 3 years apparently and clearly is not happening, what can the sheriff do in that situation? Practically, based on this?
Well, first of all, I don't know if you're aware of this. Not very many people are, but I know how much you know the Constitution, and I know that you're a good constitutional lawyer, so I'm going to guess that you do. But the federal government was formed by the states, and I know you know that. But we delegated certain limited, and Scalia calls it on page 7, he calls it discrete and enumerated powers, that the Congress of the United States was only granted discrete and enumerated powers. Congress was not delegated all governmental powers, but, quote, only discrete enumerated powers. And then the question is, how do we keep it that way? And then he says, which implication was rendered express by the 10th Amendment. We have to enforce the 10th Amendment. Mm-hmm. And so I looked up Constitution. I wanted the challenge. I wanted to take this challenge from Scalia. I wanted to enumerate all the powers delegated to the federal government that were related to law enforcement. How many law enforcement powers did we delegate to the new federal government? And I counted them and I enumerated. There's only 5.
5, yep.
5. And they are treason, counterfeiting, felonies committed on the high seas. Article 4, Section 4. They are required. They shall protect our borders from invasion. That is a law enforcement authority. And boy, don't we wish they were doing that.
Amen.
And then 5 is kind of an innocuous one, laws against nations, or I would imagine that means treaties, violations of treaties that we have with other neighboring countries or countries wherever. And so there's 5. Other than that, what they must refer to the 10th Amendment. They cannot steal or usurp anymore. But the FBI and other agencies of the federal government have stolen thousands, usurped thousands. And the problem is the states and we the people have fallen asleep, and we allowed this to happen. And now the states have got to take it back and put the federal government back in its proper lane. And that's exactly what we intend to do at the CSPOA. And we've had lots of sheriffs doing it. We just need a lot more doing it right now this year.
CSPOA.org. And there is a move also, we've seen it here in Washington State, to defund the police. Bonner County, a great sheriff up there, Sheriff Wheeler, the couple
That's
of the
in
county,
Idaho.
Yeah, it's in Idaho. A couple county commissioners came against him, wanted to defund as they were leaving office. They got voted out because of their Marxist policies. And there is this push all over the place to defund the police, and you naturally see crime skyrocket. Explain your view on this, and why is this happening?
Well, some of the attacks at sheriffs you can understand, because there were 550 sheriffs from across the country that took a stand against the COVID-19 mandates, and they refused to enforce them, and they refused to allow anybody else to enforce them. And they did not shut down churches. They did not shut down schools. Of course, most schools did because they were government run, but that was up to them. The sheriff wanted to make it clear that that he would keep them open if they wanted to. But can you imagine house arrest for citizens? House arrest, literally, people locked in their homes for weeks at a time. And some people, one in Michigan in particular, people were arrested for not keeping 6 feet social distancing, and people being arrested for not wearing a mask when they went to Walmart or grocery stores. And most of the sheriffs of these 550 told grocery stores, don't call us on stuff like that. We're not coming to babysit the masks. We're not enforcing the masks. So we're not going to, unless there's violence or threats, we're not coming. Do not ask us to do that anymore. Well, this question is answered even better with a sheriff from Tampa who arrested Pastor Rodney Howard Brown just for having church service. Imagine, in the United States of America, where we were founded on religious liberty and the practice of our religions according to our own conscience, that a sheriff had the audacity to arrest a mega church minister for just having church. On the other hand, the tale of two sheriffs here is Sheriff Glenn Hamilton was approached by a pastor in his county in New Mexico. And this was Pastor Caleb Cooper. And Pastor Cooper told the sheriff, I'm not shutting down. Just so you know, the government is sending the wrong message and we will not succumb to it. Because the Lord runs our church, not the government. And so, Sheriff, I want to know what you're going to do to protect me and my congregation from having to shut down. And Sheriff Hamilton, to his everlasting credit, said, if it takes that I have to go to jail myself, so be it. But I will do everything in my power to protect you and your church. So the state came to shut him down. Sheriff Hamilton met him outside, and he told him, I have deputized every single person in this congregation. I'm sure he didn't do it to some of the little kids or babies, but I have deputized every person in there. They are under my authority, and this church and this sheriff's office meeting will not close down. The state police left. They never came back. And Pastor Cooper kept his church open every Sunday, and he didn't close once. Not one time did he close down because of a sheriff who knew and understood his job in preserving our great constitutional republic. So that is the answer. So many sheriffs did this in Oregon and Washington. And so now some of those crazy states up in your Northwest area where you're from, they've now tried to diminish the authority and power of the sheriff. And they've actually said if a sheriff does not enforce local law, then he will not be funded by the state. So they've tried lots of different ways to do that. The sheriffs have not acquiesced. And we're trying to meet together with as many sheriffs as we possibly can on September 7th so that we can be united as sheriffs and come up with policies to regulate how federal agencies will come into our counties if they are allowed to come in at all. Because the greatest threat to our God-given American Republic is our own federal government. And we will stand strong against. If they're outside the delegated authorities, we will stand against them. And we will let them know that the Bill of Rights will be enforced strictly in our counties.
Sheriff Richard Mack, thank you for joining me on Patriot Radio today. That was fantastic. CSPOA.org, September 7th. If you're a sheriff or you know one, make sure they get there.
Yeah, and it's open to the public all day on the 7th, and just sheriffs and elected officials on the 6th. But so everybody can participate. What we would prefer is just what you said. Get your sheriff there and help us fund him, and make a donation at CSPOA.org and become a member of our posse so we can train you to be a member of yours.
Sheriff Richard Mack, keep up the fight. Really appreciate you. We'll have you back on again soon.
Thank you, Matt. See you soon, brother.
CSPOA.org. I want to mention one other thing in addition to that. This is why we support our local police, and we keep them local and independent, because Article 6 of the Constitution requires that each officer uphold the Constitution of the United States of America, not a local law, the Constitution. That's why the sheriff could have said when they tried to arrest Rosa Parks, no, you're not going to do that. So we believe, and it's clear in the Constitution, that the local sheriff is a key component to keeping our republic for the next generation. This is Matt Shea. Thank you for joining me so much on Patriot Radio today. God bless all of you. He is making this generation the greatest one. The awakening is here. Keep up the fight.